Beijing continues to report new COVID-19 infections from a food market as tens of thousands get tested. Businesses reopen as Algerian government begins easing lockdown. And at least 10 villagers killed by gunmen in Nigeria's Benue state. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In business news, gold smuggling continues to hurt the mining industry in the DRC. And ahead in your sports news, one of Africa's top match officials looks back at the World Cup in South Africa 10 years ago. We start the program in Beijing, where authorities have tested more than 76,000 people after 36 new coronavirus cases were reported on Sunday. Here's the latest on the outbreak from today's news briefing.
As of Sunday, 76,499 nucleic acid tests were conducted throughout Beijing. 59 of the results were positive. As of Monday morning, 193 sampling stations were set up throughout Beijing. I would like to remind residents in Beijing once again, those who have been to Xinfadi market and those who have had close contact with anybody from the market since May the 30th, should report to your community for tests and self-quarantine.
It is the fourth consecutive day of new cases in the city, bringing the total number to 79 since the end of last week. The cluster of infections are all connected to the Xinfadi market in the south of the city. Apart from the cases in Beijing, the Chinese mainland reports another 3 domestic cases in Hebei province. All of the infected are connected to the ones in Beijing. The neighboring city of Baoding in Hebei has beefed up its risk level, announcing strict precautions. 10 imported cases were also reported on Sunday. Chinese Vice Premier Sun Chunlan says the cluster of new cases in Beijing is very likely to spread given the density and mobility of the people at the market. Sun is leading the prevention and control team. Authorities have directed the local government to trace the origin and take resolute measures to cut the transmission. The central government also supports testing for locals to confirm cases and find asymptomatic ones. While the Chinese capital is going all out to curb the outbreak and prevent a second wave, Nicole Nge has the details.
Beijing is racing to quash the outbreak linked to a wholesale food market after reporting the country's highest daily number of new coronavirus cases in months. Mass contact tracing and testing are underway. The National Health Commission is promising to report new cases online within 2 hours, test results within 12 hours, and complete an epidemiological investigation within 24 hours. It's hoped the measures will efficiently track all the infected as well as anybody who's been in close contact with them. More than 76,000 people in the city have already been tested as of Monday morning, including those who have been to the market and those from nearby residential compounds. Other districts are also helping Fengtai collect samples, setting up nearly 200 stations. In some cases, citizens can even drive through a special zone to get tested. It takes only 2 minutes to complete the whole process, and the result will be made available within a day. Following the closure of Xinfadi market, Beijing immediately shut down nearby schools.
At 3 primary schools and 6 kindergartens in the surrounding area, classes will be stopped for all pupils who had started returning to class. For classes that had not restarted, their reopening will be pushed back.
Beyond this area, all graduating students in Haidian District's primary and secondary schools will be tested, while others will continue to study at home. Meanwhile, vegetable supplies have arrived in Beijing to secure stock for major supermarket chains. A manager for Wumart says the first batch of fruit and vegetables for its businesses in the Chinese capital stood at over 2,000 tons. That's 3 to 4 times the usual daily supply.
All of our pork, beef, mutton and fresh vegetables are shipped directly from the place of origin to ensure food safety and stable prices. We will never jack up the prices.
With plenty of vegetables, fruits and meat on the shelves, consumers don't seem to be too concerned.
The price, from my view, is at the same level as before in the supermarkets, but outside in some stores it's a bit higher.
I don't think it will become a big deal, and I don't think it will really affect the food supply.
The risk level in Huaxiang, Fengtai district, where Xinfadi wholesale market is located, has been raised to the highest in a 3-tier system. And all measures are in place to curb a possible resurgence of COVID-19. Nicole Ng, CGTN.
Germany has registered close to 9,000 deaths out of nearly 200,000 COVID-19 cases. And just by looking at those numbers alone, it is clear the government's response methods worked to get a handle on the pandemic. Natalie Carney tells us more.
Germany is being applauded both at home and abroad for its response to COVID-19. The country's first confirmed case in January was a worker at a company near Munich, and authorities acted quickly, testing other workers and tracing everyone who'd been in contact with the infected employee.
Sie hatten potenziell mit einer Covid-19 positiv getesteten Person Kontakt.
Walter Leonhard works as a contact tracer in the southern city of Rosenheim, informing people who have come within 1.5 meters of a positive case for at least 15 minutes that they too could be infected.
And regularly all of them have to go into quarantine. The only exclusion is when you are in a medical service. Some are really scared and some say, yeah, it's okay, of course, I'll do everything, no problem. And some people even are very angry and don't want to follow that. But to be honest, this is a minority of people who are very angry.
We get our information from the local health authority. They, on the other hand, get it from the hospitals or doctors who test people. We then find the contact persons. These contacts I then directly pass on to the contact tracing team. They will call all the people concerned and send them into quarantine.
While such a program is not unique to Germany, it has been essential in helping the country tackle COVID-19 by isolating those who could potentially be infected. There were also many other factors that contributed to Germany's ability to keep infection rates and deaths relatively low, says physician and professor of infectious disease, Andrew Ullman.
Many people accepted the partial shutdown that we had, but grocery stores remained open, pharmacies remained open. There was a good discipline in public transportation. And what is more important, the healthcare system worked very nicely. The hospitals were not overrun. And the other thing that was very important, that we very early on had testing available throughout Germany, so it was not only a reference laboratory in Berlin, it was basically all university hospitals had the same test kit at the same time.
But despite its success, the government has faced harsh criticism over its coronavirus response, with Chancellor Angela Merkel and state leaders branded dictators.
While the number of infected people may be on the decline here in Germany, the World Health Organization warns that the risk is still very much out there as countries around the world begin to open up. To help control the spread, the German Health Ministry has announced that a mobile app which traces the coronavirus infections should be available to the public in the coming days.
Fewer cases means less work for trackers like Walter Leonhard, but with a second wave expected, they won't be losing their jobs anytime soon.
Alles Gute, Wiederhören.
Natalie Carney for CGTN in Rosenheim.
In Africa, there are more than 242,000 coronavirus cases recorded, with more than 109,000 recoveries. According to the African Centers for Disease Control, more than 6,400 deaths have been recorded on the continent. Let's have a look at the cases by region. In the northern part of the continent, Egypt accounts for the majority of infections in the region, with a record of just over 44,500 coronavirus cases. The Egyptian government has started implementing a shorter 8-hour curfew instead of the usual 9 hours. The new restrictions will continue until the end of the month. This is part of President El-Sisi's government's coexistence plan to maintain anti-coronavirus precautionary measures while resuming economic activity. Meanwhile, in West Africa, the number of COVID-19 cases have surpassed 16,000 in Nigeria, with over 400 deaths recorded. According to local media reports, the surge has come amid a shortage of much-needed tests. The country's health authorities also say they have started witnessing community transmission of the virus. And elsewhere in East Africa, Kenya has confirmed 137 new COVID-19 infections. The total tally of infections now stands at 3,594, one of the highest in the region. Over 70 health workers have so far contracted the virus. Kenya's Health Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe says the government is committed to protecting them with an adequate supply of personal protective equipment, despite a shortage that has been reported across the country. In Central Africa, Cameroon has recorded 1,183 new cases. The total tally of the number of COVID-19 infections in the country now stands at over 9,800. The Democratic Republic of Congo follows closely with just over 4,500 infections. Last week, the head of a local task force fighting COVID-19 in eastern DRC resigned, citing frustration by the government's response to the crisis. And in the southern African region, there are over 73,600 cases. South Africa remains hardest hit on the continent with over 70,000 infections. The country has so far conducted over 1 million COVID-19 tests. The COVID-19 pandemic has also taken a toll on the South African Police Service. Police Minister Becky Cele says 14 officers have died due to the virus and over 1,600 officers are infected. In Algeria, life is slowly getting back to normal after days of lockdown to curb the spread of the coronavirus. The North African state has recorded over 10,900 cases and over 7,000 recoveries. And as Jane Keo reports, the government has been relaxing some anti-epidemic restrictions.
In the Algerian capital, Algiers, it's a new awakening. As locals resume their daily activities, it's life unusual after days under a lockdown unseen before. For business owners, it's a moment of gratitude as they resume their trade. But some cannot avoid counting their losses as the government begins easing restrictions.
We welcome the decision to ease restrictions by the government. My store is opening after 2 months of quarantine. For us as traders, it was very difficult. Personally, I recorded a big loss. I'd prayed for this moment. I'd call upon the government to take all measures to curb the threat of COVID-19.
As a citizen, it was not easy for us to keep stores closed for such a long time. It affected us citizens and the traders a lot. Some traders are close to bankruptcy and easing restrictions is timely.
So far, public transport has resumed in major cities. The state has also ended curfews in 19 provinces and reviewed hours in others. In Algiers, movement has been restricted between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. instead of the previous 7 to 7 a.m. According to a statement from the Prime Minister's office, public transport has also resumed under stringent measures. Taxi operators have also been restricted to carry only one passenger per trip. Authorities have also ended a paid leave to civil servants implemented in March. However, expectant women and those with small children will continue enjoying their leave. Jane Keo, CGTN.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. To stay with us.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
To some disturbing news now coming out of Nigeria, where 10 people have been killed and several others wounded in an attack on a village in Benue State. The attack was carried out by unknown gunmen. According to a local council chairman, the villagers were attacked while coming from their farms on Sunday. He also said security forces have been dispatched to the area to pursue the attackers. Conflicts between Fulani herders and local farming communities are common in Benue. So far, motorbikes have been banned in the state to curb insecurity. Meanwhile, dozens more people have been killed in Kano State in a raid conducted by suspected ISIL fighters. The attack happened on Saturday on a remote village called Goni Usmanti. According to witnesses and survivors, the jihadists first attacked the village, burnt houses before shooting dead fleeing locals. Several people were injured. The militants later opened fire on a truck transporting traders, burning it with people inside. Only 2 people managed to escape. Authorities are pursuing the perpetrators. The latest attack comes days after another deadly one in the same state on Tuesday, in which more than 60 people were killed. Terrified locals have been speaking about the Saturday raid.
Many people started running when the gunshot started. The attackers came in many numbers. I saw them with my own eyes as I was running. They killed my brother and my husband.
Well, let's get more on this developing story. Majid Dahiru, a political and security analyst based in Abuja, is joining us with more on that situation in Nigeria. Majid, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. First off, why are these attacks by militants persisting in the northeast despite deployment of thousands of security personnel in the region?
Thank you very much. Northern Nigeria is part of the prehistoric Western Sudanese region that experienced Islamist revivalist movements throughout the 19th century. And the legacies of these jihadi movements are still very much alive today because they have been reinforced by the proliferation of radical Islamist ideologies in such a manner that has gone unchecked for several decades into modern Nigeria. And as such, despite the military effort at curtailing insurgency, as long as the root cause, the ideological root causes of the insurgency remains unchecked, you are rest assured that for every insurgent that is killed in the battlefield, there are hundreds of replacements waiting to be recruited into the ranks of the deadly Boko Haram insurgent group. And that is why the insurgency appears to be intractable, because the seeds of radicalization are still being watered. Unfortunately, not even from the fringes of the society, but from the mainstream. And as long as the Nigerian state has not been able to check the proliferation of radical Islamic ideologies, the Boko Haram insurgency is not likely to be contained in the nearest future.
But it does also seem, Majid, though, that banditry is also becoming a major security threat in the northwest of Nigeria. Why is that?
And that is also because on the northwestern flank of the Nigerian border, there is a conflict between citizenship and culture because of the similarities in ethnicity on both sides of the border. And now what this has done, it has rendered the entire northwestern flank of Nigeria practically borderless. And for a long time, due to this conflict, it has become very easy for killer herdsmen to move in from the Sahel into Nigeria unchecked and carry out such atrocious activities as mass murder, kidnapping for ransom, armed robbery, maiming and killing of innocent Nigerians. And the failure of the Nigerian state to declare killer herdsmen as terrorist groups, having been designated as the 4th most dangerous group in the world, is also at the root of this crisis. Unfortunately, killer herdsmen terrorism is being treated erroneously as farmers' hardest clashes in Nigeria up until this point in time. And this is not the fact. The fact is, these are terrorist organizations that are out to kill and maim, who do not breed cattle, and whose interest is not entirely about land, but about criminal economic advantage of what has become a thoroughfare of killer herdsmen in Nigeria. And so the Nigerian state has failed, has been severally advised to designate the activities of killer herdsmen as terrorism and not farmers' hardest clashes, in order to bring up the military response to a terrorist organization that is threatening to wipe out Nigerian civilian lives in the Northwest.
So it does seem that there is insecurity on both sides of the border here, but also Nigeria's military, as a result, has suffered huge losses in recent attacks. What do we know so far about its response to these specific attacks?
The military is overstretched. Nigeria, for example, is a country of nearly 200 million people with a landmass that is over 100,000 square miles. And so for an armed forces strength that is less than 500,000, you can understand how much of overstretch that the Nigerian forces is actually witnessing now. And as such, it hampers their ability to secure lives and properties of Nigerians over a large swath of land. So Nigeria has a large swath of ungoverned spaces, as well as millions of ungoverned lives, because of the inadequacy of the Nigerian armed forces. And at this point, it has been suggested that apart from increasing troop presence, apart from increasing the capacity of Nigeria's security forces to respond to such threats, there is now a need to probably allow communities to actually secure themselves by the government allowing them some limited armament capabilities for the purposes of self-defense. Because since the Nigerian armed forces have come under serious overstretch arising from multiple fronts of conflict within the Nigerian state, it is imperative now to allow for native communities that are affected by insurgency as well as cross-border banditry, the capabilities, the lethal capabilities to defend themselves. And this has been voiced on the floor of Nigeria's National Assembly. And I think the government should take the advice of some of the lawmakers that are now proposing a relaxation of Nigeria's gun laws, something like what you have in America, the second amendment you have in America for Nigeria, where Nigerians are now allowed to bear arms to defend themselves, since it is clear that Nigerian security forces.
All right, Majid Dahiru joining us there from Abuja with a developing situation in northeast and western Nigeria. Thank you. Now, Somalia is resuming talks with the unrecognized government of a breakaway region, Somaliland. That's according to Djibouti's President Ismail Omar Guelleh. A delegation including Somali's President Mohamed Abdullahi and Somaliland leader Muse Bihi Abdi, as well as the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, has arrived in Djibouti. Talks are expected to follow up on earlier mediation efforts. Somaliland broke away from Somalia in the early 1990s after the eruption of a civil war. It has since been pushing for international recognition that would allow it to source funding and aid from financial bodies such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Several rounds of talks between the two sides failed in the past. Well, let's get more on that story now. I'm joined by CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello. He's live for us in Mogadishu in Somalia's capital. Abdulaziz, Somalia resumes talks with Somaliland over the weekend. What more can you tell us about the talks?
Well, Beatrice, just as you have mentioned, previous talks failed to materialize, and this is the first time that the federal government of Somalia and Somaliland, the breakaway region in northern Somalia, are actually meeting for the first time in 5 years. The last time they met was in 2015, and ever since then, many things have changed. Somaliland went to the polls to elect Musa Bihi Abdi as the president there. And elections also here in Mogadishu took place, whereby Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo was elected in February 8, 2017. So basically what is happening now is the Somali government here from Mogadishu went to Djibouti alongside the Somaliland representatives. They are led by both leaders from both sides. This is the first time to reignite talks that had stalled for almost 5 years. So from the federal government side, the high-level delegation comprised of the country's president, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, Prime Minister Hassan Ali Khaire, as well as the Speaker of the House of Parliament, Mohamed Mursal. So technically what experts are saying is that the federal government of Somalia is trying to show a united front in these talks and to try to convince Somaliland, that has been advocating for independence for close to 3 decades now, that it should change its stance and join the fold and be given more power here at the federal level, so that it can abandon its stance. So the talks there will go on for the next 3 days, but the biggest debate going on there right now is two opposing views. Somalia insists rather that Somaliland is part and parcel of the Somali Republic, but Somaliland maintains that it is not part of Somalia and it has been independent for close to 3 decades and now, with its own flag, its own passport, its own currency. Basically it's advocating for unity, and the fact that the Somali government is not allowing this, that means the talks might not yield any tangible results now, but basically that has been set aside, but they're now focusing more on technical aspects and areas that both sides tend to disagree mostly. But the talks will last for the next 3 days. Somaliland is trying to bring its grievances that it had suffered from the military regime before the civil war. This is one of the reasons that it has decided not to join the Somali Union, but the platform that it has received right now is much big, because the European Union as well as the United Nations and the United States government are also part of this talk. So for Somaliland, this is a big win, because they have a bigger platform to air their issues against the federal government of Somalia.
Right. Abdulaziz, as you mentioned there, it is early days and the talks will continue for the next 3 days. But some reports indicate that Somalia has recognized the contested leader in the semi-autonomous border state. Could you tell us more about this?
Well, it came as a surprise here in Mogadishu yesterday, just before the president went to Djibouti for the Somaliland talks. There's a statement that was issued by the president's office that recognized Ahmed Mohamed Islam as the president of the Jubaland state. But the statement was a bit conflicting, because the government is referring to Ahmed Islam as the interim leader of Jubaland administration. Before he was called the president, but now the statement reads interim. It seems that the federal government of Somalia has come under increased pressure from all sides and the international community to recognize Ahmed Islam as the regional leader, because the country is headed to the polls later this year, whereby regional elections are due to take place for the federal parliament, as well as presidential elections that will take place in February 2021. And there's been so much talks that the federal government that has been in contesting the elections since last year will not hold polls as planned. This has been the concern, especially from the opposition leaders here, as well as some sources within the international community. So the view is that the president of Somalia finally recognized Ahmed Islam as the interim leader to save the situation here in Somalia, because the election commission is supposed to come to parliament to explain the type of election that will take place in Somalia. Previously, the Somali government insisted that the elections will be one man, one vote, the first time in 50 years. It's very hard to achieve this, owing to the fact that security remains a big challenge here in Somalia, with a threat posed by the militant group Al-Shabaab. So regional leaders are insisting that they must have a say in the way that elections will be conducted, and this is one of the reasons as to why the federal government of Somalia was forced to recognize Ahmed Mohamed Islam as the interim leader of Jubaland. There's been so much politics and there's been so much conflict of interest, including between Ethiopia, Kenya, as well as Somalia, regarding the election of Ahmed Islam. It seems that he enjoys more support from Kenya, and the statement from the office of the president insists that Kenya should stop meddling in the internal affairs of Somalia and leave this issue as it is to Somalis to decide their next future.
Abdulaziz Bello joining us there from Mogadishu with that update from Somalia. Thank you. Now, in the United States, Atlanta police have released body camera footage of the moments leading to the moment when an officer shot and killed a black man. The incident on Friday caused a new wave of protest against racial injustice. Toby Muse has the details.
27-year-old Rayshard Brooks, an African-American man in Atlanta, was killed by police after a scuffle. Authorities say as the officers tried to take Brooks into custody, a scuffle broke out. Brooks managed to get the taser from one of the police officers. Video shows him running away. Authorities say at that moment he turned to try to use the taser on the police officer. The police officer fired, killing Brooks. The killing set off new protests in Atlanta, where protesters were already entering their third week of protest for the killing of another African-American man by a police officer, George Floyd. The protesters blocked roads and a highway and torched a restaurant. The police fired tear gas and flash grenades. In similar cases like this, local authorities have often been criticized for slowly reacting. Not Atlanta. The officer involved in the shooting was fired. The city's mayor announced that the city's police chief had resigned. The mayor said she didn't believe this was a justifiable use of deadly force. Sunday saw protests in Washington, Atlanta, Boston, Cleveland, Los Angeles, and other cities. One common slogan here is defund the police. But what does that mean? For many, it means that the police in this country have received overly generous budgets for decades. And defund the police for these people would mean taking some of that money and investing it in healthcare, education, and mental illness, with the idea of investing in trying to prevent the crimes rather than investing in trying to solve them later.
Nobody is going to defund the police. We can restructure the police forces, restructure, reimagine policing. That is what we're going to do.
These differences over the term defund the police show just how diverse a movement this Black Lives Matter has become. Toby Muse, CGTN, Washington.
And we spoke earlier to Atiba Madyun, the president and founder of political data collector party Politics US. He explained to us the obstacles to police reform.
There's a systemic issue here. You keep hearing the president talk about law and order. Well, for those of us in the African-American community, law and order is a term that goes back to slavery. It's a term, when you look at the police forces that are here, it goes back to the slave patrols that were used to keep us in line. As slavery grew in America, so did the number of slaves. We were outnumbering the slave owners, so in order to keep us in check, they needed slave patrols. In order to keep us in check today, they use police patrols. And if you look at what the president continues to talk about, is law and order. Law and order was typically supposed to mean protecting the property. The property was the slave. Well, now it's protecting the business, because you see people are upset about the riots and what have you that's going on. People are tired, and they're not tearing down things just to tear them down, because this thing that you're seeing here, this fire that has been ignited here, it is the byproduct of centuries of African Americans being sick and tired of being accused of things, of losing our own property. And this whole idea of defunding the police is basically to say, why do we have to keep paying a police force that's only going to kill our young men, our young women, our children?
In South Africa, some non-governmental organizations have held a vigil to protest against the discrimination of black people. The vigil was led by Black Lives Matter Solidarity Movement. The vigil is in solidarity with the United States protests. It is also about local issues, which include the fight against gender violence. Here's CGTN's Julissa Njamela with more.
The Black Lives Matter Solidarity Movement here in South Africa focuses on global injustices, but it also recognizes injustices here in our own country and fights against them. Those injustices include the discrimination against black people and gender violence, amongst others.
I think it's really a reckoning about global systems of oppression that have existed for centuries, from colonialism and even prior to that. We're here because we want to be part of a solution to help dismantle structures of oppression, of white supremacy, of systems that really cannot be dismantled unless white people take an active role in helping deconstruct them.
These activists also highlighted the issue of violence against women and children in this country. According to the South African presidency, gender-based violence in South Africa has reached critical proportions, despite efforts by the South African government to address violence against women and children. A 2019 report by Statistics South Africa shows that 1 in 5 women has experienced physical violence.
It starts with us as men having the conversation amongst ourselves. I think we need to redefine what it means to be a man. You know, change the perspective of that a man doesn't cry, a man is aggressive, a man, is physical. We need to change that perspective.
More protests and vigils are due to be held around the country, all in the name of fighting societal injustices and to continue to be in solidarity with the United States Black Lives Matter movement. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
With travel beyond borders halted and gatherings restricted, the tourism industry across the world has suffered greatly. Kenya is one of the countries now making use of the digital space to share the unique sights and sounds that tourists, both local and domestic, can enjoy once travel resumes. Wilkista Nyabwa reports.
The two cats prowl across a grassland, at once as exciting as they are frightening. A human being wouldn't stand a chance in a race against them, but the observer is never at risk. The cats are prowling in the wild, hundreds of kilometers away, as would-be tourists watch from the safety of their homes. In the face of a worldwide pandemic that has caused countries across the globe to close their borders and restrict travel, tourism in Kenya has gone online.
If you go out of sight and you go out of mind, the challenge is, as a destination, or even when you want to come back, it means that you're going to have to invest a lot more in terms of getting people to, first of all, remember that you exist, but also remember what you exist for.
Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Tourism, Najib Balala, launched a virtual live stream showcasing game safaris and other unique cultural experiences across the country. The Kenya Tourism Board has deployed a team that will travel across the country for 6 weeks. Every day they stream on social media the best of what Kenya has to offer tourists.
The challenge we had is travel is about an experience that people have. An experience is something you have to be able to feel, to touch, to be around. So we had to find a mechanism to be able to bring that experience to people's home.
The tourism sector has been hit hard by the outbreak of COVID-19. Hotels and many tourist attractions have been forced to shut down and send workers home. Kenya is the third largest travel and tourism economy in Africa after South Africa and Nigeria. In select facilities, only a few workers remain, some guarding the wildlife against poachers. But with the daily live feed, viewers have had the opportunity to get closer to sites without the disruption of crowds. And stakeholders acknowledge that this is likely to impact tourist choices even after travel resumes.
They will be much more interested in experiences that are a lot more enriching, a lot more informative, a lot more collaborative, experiences that make a difference in places that they go to.
And when they return, the country will be waiting.
Even as the world grapples with the pandemic, Kenya's tourism sector is keen to remind travelers of the magic that awaits them once travel resumes, and stakeholders are now tapping into digital tools to ensure that even after the pandemic, travelers will enjoy a fuller, richer travel experience. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
And your business news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Gold smuggling continues to hurt the mining industry in the DRC. And Egypt's airports to reopen on the 1st of July.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
A UN investigation has unearthed a network smuggling gold from the Democratic Republic of Congo into global supply chains. The report details the illegal exports of the mineral to the UAE as well as Burundi, Rwanda and Tanzania. UN group of experts estimates that at least 1.1 tons of gold was smuggled out of Ituri province alone in 2019. That would have earned the government up to $1.88 million in taxes had it been legally exported. DRC has been counting millions in losses as trade in the precious metal continues to fuel regional wars and fund rebel fighters. It has also led to UN sanctions on traders involved in a bid to stop the flow. Egypt is set to reopen all its airports on the 1st of July. This comes after suspending regular international flights due to the coronavirus pandemic. The country's aviation minister Mohamed Manar Anba says tourism will be limited to resorts in 3 coastal airports. He adds that the government has outlined measures to be taken inside planes, at airports and in hotels to help to ensure the safety and health of foreign tourists. Tourists from countries with high rates of coronavirus infections will require testing before arriving in Egypt. Currently, Egypt has 44,598 cases and 1,575 deaths.
Hopefully, on July the 1st, we will resume flights in all airports of the Republic. Perhaps there was some confusion the last period. Tourism will be on the coastal cities, as the Minister of Tourism will explain. Regarding all other airports, flights will resume gradually alongside the countries that intend to reopen with us on July the 1st.
On July 1st, as His Excellency the Minister of Aviation has said, we will begin to receive tourists in only 3 provinces to begin with. Those 3 provinces are South Sinai, Red Sea and the Matru. These 3 provinces were chosen because they are coastal cities and are far away from large population gatherings. They also have some of the least coronavirus cases around the country.
Neighboring Sudan is expected to keep its airports closed to international and domestic commercial flights until June 28th. This comes after the government shut the airports in March as part of measures to combat the coronavirus pandemic. Sudan Civil Authorities spokesman Abdul Hafiz Abdul Rahim says the airports will be opened only for flights transporting cargo, humanitarian aid, oil organization workers or evacuating foreigners. And staying in Sudan, the government is expected to begin rolling out an experimental program of direct cash transfers to its neediest citizens. This is in an attempt to wean the country off costly subsidies. Under the pilot program, the government will transfer $9 per person each month, beginning in Khartoum's West Soba district. The cash payments are expected to be adjusted for inflation, which is currently pegged at 100%. The government has recently begun talks with the International Monetary Fund on a non-funded program. This could pave the way for international financial support, with the country's foreign debt estimated at $62 billion. Europe is taking a big step towards normalcy as many countries open borders to fellow Europeans after 3 months of coronavirus lockdowns. And while the people love their summer holidays, it's not clear how many are ready to travel again. CGTN Stefan de Vries has this report.
Europe will open most of its internal borders on Monday to allow travel to and from the majority of countries. The reopening comes just in time for the millions of Europeans who usually spend their summer holiday in July or August. However, travelers from the UK or from Sweden must observe a 15-day quarantine when they return home. The reopening was eagerly awaited. Countries that are the hardest hit in Europe by the coronavirus pandemic, France, Italy and Spain, also heavily depend on tourism. But many Europeans may decide to spend this year's summer close to home instead. And that could be a major blow for France, the world's most visited tourist destination. Due to the lack of foreign visitors, many hotels, restaurants and other businesses are already struggling or facing bankruptcy. In May, the government promised a stimulus package of 18 billion euros to save the tourism sector. And now attractions in France are gradually reopening again, like the Louvre Museum, the Eiffel Tower right behind me, or Europe's largest theme park, Disneyland Paris. The government expects a slump of 50% in the number of visitors this year. And although Europeans can travel again from Monday, that's not the case for tourists from outside the EU. The external borders will stay closed until at least the 1st of July, with any reopening being gradual and depending on the coronavirus situation in each area. Stefan de Vries, CGTN, Paris.
In Ghana, social and religious gatherings of up to 100 people are now allowed, with hotels and restaurants operating under new safety measures. However, bars, pubs and nightclubs still remain firmly closed. From Accra, here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai exploring how bartenders are struggling to make up for lost tips.
Since the outbreak of the coronavirus in Ghana, David Nyamiche's job as a bartender has been badly hit.
It's been very, very frustrating because no one saw this coming, as in the length of how it will last for.
The government has relaxed restrictions after 3 months of lockdown, but bars, nightclubs and pubs are still not allowed to open. The COVID-19 pandemic is threatening the livelihoods of many Ghanaian youth employed within the hospitality industry.
We are not generating any revenue for us to be able to pay our partners, our suppliers, even salaries enough and stuff like that. So it's been a big issue.
Ghana has not flattened the curve on its COVID-19 infections, but the government says it had to ease the lockdown restrictions to reduce its impact on the economy. But some sectors have yet to bounce back.
The throbbing heart of Accra's nightlife along Usu Oxford Street behind me would normally be buzzing on a Friday night. But with the closure of bars and pubs due to the coronavirus pandemic, this area is now very quiet.
And those within the hospitality industry are finding it difficult adjusting to these tough times.
Over 280 bartenders are currently in an association. Most of them have been laid off with no pay. And most of them are working in these big industries and big hotels. I believe they should have also given us the opportunity to operate with a laid-down procedure, with a social distancing, and also put in measures that might also not spread the disease.
Experts say business owners may have to make some critical decisions, as it's uncertain when the pandemic will be over.
Some businesses may not survive. Others who will survive will have to take a hard decision as to having a frank conversation with their staff. Do we continue to pay you at the levels that were set for you, or we reduce it to cover and elicit cost savings and maintain our business so that we can survive post-COVID enough to guarantee you a job? So there's got to be some sacrifices made on both parts.
These bartenders are afraid of losing their jobs and want the government to consider relaxing restrictions on their business. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. One of Africa's top match officials looks back on the World Cup in South Africa 10 years on.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find